Okay, so our next speaker is Daniel Clark, and he is the e-learning manager at the University of Kent. So we're very pleased that he's presenting today. So thanks, Dan. He's going to talk about the catalyst or distraction, the global pandemic, and its impact on digital accessibility in higher education. So I'll just share Dan's screen now.
I think I already am, Phil. Should be. Hopefully.
That's it.
Yeah. Can everyone see the slides and hear me, hopefully?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan, and I obviously manage the e-learning team here at the University of Kent. I'm going to talk to you about digital accessibility, or more specifically, digital accessibility and the impact of the global pandemic. So this session is largely born out of my interest in what I see as some of the conflicting discourses around digital accessibility and how the rapid shift, or the effects of the rapid shift to online delivery in 2020. So the session is largely focused on data that I've gathered from UK universities in the past 2 to 3 months and how the sector's responded to the pandemic and what sort of trends we might see in that data. And it's probably important to note at this point that the data informing this work is very much from a range of sources that combine FOI, discussions with colleagues elsewhere, and data that was already in the public domain. So in total, I've got data from just over 100 HE institutions in the UK. I don't need to talk about this very much, but it's a brief reminder of the regulations that have been the driving force for a lot of the work around digital accessibility, public sector bodies accessibility regulations, or PSBAR, as I'm going to refer to them now, which were introduced in September 2018. So if we whiz back to March 2020, as we were preparing our response to the national lockdown, a member of the University of Kent's executive group turned to me and said, "You and your team must have been waiting for this day." And this was coming from someone that knew the challenges my team had faced over the years trying to get academic staff to engage with digital learning. But it did make me think, have we really been waiting for this day? My fear was that in such rapid change, things get forgotten and things get left behind. And unfortunately, accessibility is habitually regarded as an afterthought. And so my concern was that the pandemic may resurface this sort of mindset and undo a lot of the good work that had been done both at Kent and in the sector more widely. And at Kent, and I'm sure Ben will agree with this, we felt we were in quite a good place. Ben's team had been trying to mainstream accessibility for a long time and with great success. And under the sharper focus of the PSBAR, we've been able to put accessibility front and centre. We also have the benefit of tools such as Blackboard Ally for alternate formats in our VLE and automatic closed captions for our video content. But I think to us, COVID did feel like a distraction, both in terms of just focus, but in simple terms, because all the energies and efforts and channels of communication for that human aspect of digital accessibility were just in an instant absorbed by our broader response to the pandemic. And I think what was most concerning here is that the institutional outlook started to change, and we began to hear things like, well, thank goodness we've got Blackboard Ally, and thank goodness we have automated captions. And so it felt to me that we were in a good place originally, and that the pandemic started to act as this distraction, just in resourcing terms and in terms of focus. And the institutional mindset started to change, in that we began to hear people saying things like, well, thank goodness we've got Blackboard Ally, and thank goodness we have closed captions, automatic closed captions, and well, at least we're meeting our obligations. And I think that mindset started to creep in, and institutions started to place too greater emphasis on automated digital accessibility tools, such as Ally and automated captions. And the competing demands of COVID removed that human from the process, just as we've seen with plagiarism and academic integrity. We've automated and systematized a process that starts and ends with a human being at some point. And I argue that automation alone can actually be quite dangerous and damaging, as it lulls us into this false sense of security. And I think it makes us neglect our responsibilities as content creators sometimes. And all of this felt at odds to a lot of the literature that was starting to emerge in early summer 2020. So this quote from Universities UK, where they were extolling the virtues of the pandemic as this catalysing event. Or perhaps the quote from the JISC Learning and Teaching Reimagine report, in which the word opportunity, I think, is noted no less than 28 times. This all seemed to fly in the face of how I felt about the pandemic and its effect on digital accessibility. And when you dig a little deeper, you can see that in the rapid move to online delivery, all is not equal, and the sector is falling short in this area. So in the Arriving at Thriving report, it was noted that a quarter of students surveyed felt that their courses were inaccessible in relation to digital resources. And similarly, in the NADP report on COVID, it highlighted numerous issues related to digital resources or the overall lack of awareness from academic staff concerning digital accessibility. And the picture at Kent was similar. So here's some of the feedback that we've seen coming through in module evaluations. And the quote that sticks out most to me is the bottom one, which sort of highlights two things: that automation is no panacea. And so the presence of automated captions or the presence of format shifting technology doesn't guarantee anything, but perhaps we're just not getting the basics right. So if we start to look at some of the institutional data from the research that I've done, 73% of the 101 institutional responses indicated that they had undertaken work specifically in the area of digital accessibility because of the pandemic. And some responses did note that it's actually probably quite difficult to disentangle whether this was a direct result of COVID or whether it was just continued work towards the PS bar compliance. But broadly speaking, institutions appear to have been reactive to the pandemic in some form or another. And when we drill into the data a little bit more, there's an obvious trend towards procurement of format shifting software such as Blackboard Ally or Census Access. And in the responses, it was actually fascinating to see a number of institutions that said, we were already looking at Blackboard Ally, but we decided to purchase it sooner because of the pandemic. The majority of institutions noted that there had been an increase in the number of queries from academic staff, specifically relating to digital accessibility, so 72% there. And again, the elaborations on this data, you can see that they're perhaps more telling in that they indicate that almost half of the queries received related to the use of automated accessibility technologies, so such as editing or correcting automated captions or using format shifting software. And so from some of the discussions that I've held with colleagues at other universities, when asked whether they thought the pandemic was a catalyst or a distraction, their responses were actually quite mixed. This particular learning technologist said that it's a distraction. We simply don't have the resources to convert ourselves from face-to-face to fully online. I really like this quote from a TEL manager that says that the utopian digitally accessible university will remain nothing but a dream whilst we continue to perpetuate repurposing analog content into digital systems. And finally, this learning designer talks about it being an opportunity, and that actually what it shows is that the world didn't end when we make rapid changes. And I think I agree, the world didn't end, but I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. So returning to my initial question, was the global pandemic a catalyst or a distraction? Well, has it given universities the much needed impetus to bring about real change in digital learning and sow the seeds of a fully accessible digital experience? Or has it sapped the resources and focus of already depleted teams and forced institutions down a route of looking to automate digital accessibility where there's no other option? I think I would argue that it's actually a combination of the two. So the data shows that the majority of institutions have reacted to accelerate their support for digital accessibility in response to the pandemic, and this is a good thing. The data also shows that institutions have invested hundreds of thousands of pounds to introduce systems and processes that support digital accessibility. And we can see in the data that there's an upward trend and wider levels of engagement from academic staff. So this is all positive stuff. However, students continue to report issues, and many students feel that there is actually less support available now than there was before the pandemic. Some academic staff still seem unaware of their responsibilities. Perhaps this message is just getting lost amongst everything else that they have to do as part of their roles. I feel that we've developed an over-reliance on automation of accessibility. I don't think it's the fault of the technology. I'm not having a go at the technology, but it does nudge us down the path of box ticking and forgetting that content creation is actually a human process. And there continues to be this lack of clarity around the regulations. It's taken sector-wide working groups, which Ben will attest to, just to interpret the legislation. And it makes it so much harder for institutions to then implement that.
You have a minute left, Dan.
Cool, thank you. And there continues to be just this perception that digital accessibility is for the few. And so I've heard several academic staff say that, well, this doesn't apply to me because I don't have any visually impaired students on my module. I think most of these issues can actually be resolved with better and more meaningful communication. But the challenge of good communication is always getting people to listen. So I would say that if the global pandemic truly is a catalyzing event, then we need to stop thinking of digital accessibility as something that we're obliged to do. Our systems and resources and processes need to be born accessible, and that people need to take an active responsibility for that in their work. And that's me done. Apologies about the technical issues midway through there. Hopefully it only dropped out for a second. All done.
Yes, we only lost you for a short time, Dan, so not to worry. Do we have any questions in the Q&A?
Yeah, we have quite a few actually. So one that's been upvoted quite a lot is from Anonymous, and they say, from experience during the pandemic, accessibility discussions have focused almost entirely around captioning. Do you have any suggestions to make people see the wider implications of accessibility being more than just video, especially in STEM, where graphical imagery is extremely important?
I think it's the reason captions are perhaps have such a sharper focus is because the vast majority of our content at the moment is disseminated via video, and that's drawing a lot of that focus there. But I agree, I think it does detract from all of the other areas where we should be making sure that our information and our resources are accessible. On one of those slides, actually, it indicated that there was a number of queries related to the provision of STEM materials. Actually, I pulled that out as a separate theme in the data when it came back from institutions, that STEM is an area in particular where people, I don't want to say struggle, but find it a challenge to make materials like that accessible. I'm going to pass over to Ben to maybe contribute something to the chat there, because I know Ben's been doing a lot of work around LaTeX and mathematical notation, but I completely agree. Captioning is quite a distraction at the moment. Everything's focused on captioning, and it's a bigger issue than that.
Yeah, and I've just seen Stefano has actually replied to that question in the chat. So that he's your guy for STEM stuff. Have we got time for another question, Phil?
If it's a very quick one, I think we've got about a minute left.
Okay, just very, very quickly, Rebecca Vickerstaff from University of Plymouth has just said, have you found the integration of tools such as Ally, Blackboard Ally, is a positive addition, or one that staff just see as something else they have to do?
It's tricky to answer succinctly, but I think the vast majority of staff recognise that it's a positive addition. They recognise the reason why it's there, but I don't know whether academic staff have the time in their schedules to really pay attention to what the information coming back off Ally is actually telling them. I think a lot of that's the message that we provide about what Ally is for, but at the same time, I think the institution needs to recognise that if we're serious about this, then we need to make sure in work allocation models and whatever we call it, different institutions, that academic staff have the time to focus their attention on this. I think it's a balance very much.
Cool, thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.